Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about human rights and government policy. Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to Policy and Rights here on Depictions Media Radio, and I am your host, Michael Clouds. So, let's straight off the top, we're going to talk about the residential schools and what the federal government is and isn't doing, and how it's actually being seen. We're gonna hear in a little bit from Charlie Angus, and he is with some of the survivors from the St. Anne's Residential School. And here's what they're saying is that they haven't gotten the school rosters or school listings of who was there and who wasn't there, and because they want to find the listings of those who had died, so that they can properly memorialize the people. And the promise of the federal government to actually provide this information and to ensure that all parties are somehow held responsible for what happened to the children at St. Anne's in every residential school across Canada. And instead of just simply turning over the information, the federal government has put blockers up and has gone to court and to fight against actually sharing a lot of the information. And Charlie Angus and the ladies that he is with from the St. Anne's Residential School are speaking out against that. And when Justin Trudeau was in Kamloops, he said something that about how words mean a lot. Well, when words are empty, they don't mean anything. The words have to be followed by actions, and that's what we need to see from our government. It's words and actions. We need to see the actions come into play, that you're actually doing what it is that you said you're going to do. And that is what they're saying in this segment, is that the federal government has not done what it is that they're promising to do. So, along with residential schools today, we're also going to listen to some other segments that have to deal with global health and how the WHO is going to what their role in that is actually going to be, and what other health authorities around the world, what it is that how they can participate in helping create a healthier planet, and to create a system that will help alert us better about the epidemics and hopefully avoiding a large pandemic like we've seen with COVID-19. Um, that also comes with a bit of a history and where this isn't the first time that we've had a global pandemic. So we'll get to that segment a little bit later on in the show, and we're going to also hear from British Columbia with their new program called CleanBC, and we'll see how clean CleanBC really can be. All right, so let's move forward on with Charlie Angus and speaking out about the St. Anne's Residential School in Canada. Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
Bonjour. The Prime Minister's trip last week to Kamloops was the perfect opportunity to repair his broken relationship with the survivors of the residential schools. Instead, he continued in the dismal patterns of denial and prevarication. He falsely stated that the government has turned over all the relevant documents to the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation. And this falsehood was quickly exposed as the government continues to stall on turning over the school narratives and the supporting documents that were used in the independent assessment process. And nowhere is the abuse of rights and the failure to turn over documents more glaring than in the treatment of the survivors of St. Anne's Residential School. Because when the hearings for the compensation were being held, the Justice Department of Canada deliberately withheld thousands of pages of police evidence, and further, they supplied false POI, that's persons of interest reports, on some of the more notorious criminal abusers of children. So for the cases relating to Oblate priest Father Jules Laguerriere, the government supplied a one-page POI report when in reality they had evidence on this perpetrator that ran 3,191 pages. For the notorious abuser Father Arthur Lavoie, the Justice Department gave the hearings a short two-page report, when in fact they suppressed 2,472 pages of his horrific and relentless abuse against innocent children. Survivors who suffered at the hands of this monster were challenged by government lawyers. Survivors who came forward in good faith, like Evelyn Korkmaz, were not believed by a process that favored the Justice Department and the Catholic Church. These survivors were denied the compensation that was entitled to them because the government lied and suppressed evidence. And I think now of Stella Chapman, who stood here with us just a few years ago, a survivor of horrific abuse. She begged Carolyn Bennett to turn over the POI report so she could get justice, and they never complied. For 8 years, survivors of St. Anne's have fought through the courts for justice. And to this day, the Prime Minister continues to refuse to turn over the reports in numerous cases and denying justice. But now we have a better picture of the scale of the abuse of the legal rights of St. Anne's survivors. The latest report by Justice Ian Pitfield reveals some damning numbers. So what is the Pitfield report? Well, facing the enormous pressure from the ongoing media reports on the betrayal of rights of the St. Anne's survivors, Minister Carolyn Bennett went to federal court to call for the appointment of a review process run by Justice Pitfield. Now, it's really important to make this clear. The government wasn't concerned about the deliberate denial of justice to survivors. They were upset that the St. Anne's survivors were making them look bad. So I've supplied you with the addendum to the government's legal filings to the federal court, where the government accuses Murray Sinclair, St. Anne's survivor, Edmund Matatawaban, Evelyn Korkmaz, of undermining the public's faith in the government because they spoke out against these kangaroo hearings. And I have to say to my friends in the media, you're not free either. Oh no. The government went to federal court to say the CBC made them look bad. They went to federal court saying APTN made them look bad, and the Globe and Mail. Oh, and also Canadian Press. So when the Pitfield report was set up, it wasn't established for justice for the survivors. It was established to be a whitewash for the government. And I note that in his report, Justice Pitfield doesn't lose much sleep over the fact that survivors went into hearings without access to evidence that was in the hands of the defendants, the Catholic Church, and Canada. But nonetheless, Justice Pitfield reveals that at least 81 survivors of horrific child abuse will need to have their cases re-examined. 81. This represents a massive miscarriage of justice. And on top of this, the government has deliberately excluded a number of problematic cases that Pitfield has not been able to examine. For example, Evelyn Korkmaz's case. So what kind of credible process would let the defendant, Canada, who suppressed the evidence in the first place, decide what the review process actually gets to look at? And on top of this, we've learned that Justice Pitfield will not speak to a single survivor. No survivor is being included in this process, and their legal rights are not being respected. Mr. Prime Minister, you have to take responsibility for this miscarriage of justice. These survivors have done no wrong. For year after year after year, they have come here to Ottawa, they've come to federal court, they've asked for a simple thing, for closure. And yet you and your ministers and your lawyers have played a cruel cat and mouse game to try and deny them access to justice. The survivors are tired of having to do this. This is your responsibility, Mr. Prime Minister, to do the right thing, to comply with the court orders, and to bring closure once and for all for the survivors of St. Anne's Residential School. Nous sommes ici aujourd'hui pour demander au Premier ministre, M. Trudeau, d'assumer la responsabilité des abus de justice perpétrés contre les survivants du pensionnat de Sainte-Anne. Les avocats du gouvernement ont caché des milliers de pages de preuves de horribles abus des enfants et de violences sexuelles à Sainte-Anne. La décision de cacher les documents a sapé les tribunaux et nié justice pour les survivants de Sainte-Anne. Le nouveau rapport du juge Pitfield a révélé que la majorité des survivants de Sainte-Anne n'avaient pas accès aux preuves pour l'audience judiciaire. C'est un abus de justice. Aussi, le juge Pitfield déclare qu'au moins 81 cas devront être réexaminés. C'est une grave erreur judiciaire. Alors, qui va assumer la responsabilité de cet abus délibéré de la justice? C'est la responsabilité de M. Trudeau. Il a protégé son ministère et ses fonctionnaires. Il doit prendre responsabilité pour cet abus de justice. Il doit mettre en place un processus pour garantir les droits légaux des survivants de Sainte-Anne. Il n'est pas de réconciliation au Canada sans justice pour les survivants de Sainte-Anne. There is no reconciliation possible in Canada without justice for the St. Anne survivors. I will now turn it over to Evelyn Korkmaz, and then we will have Deputy Grand Chief Rebecca Friday from Mushkegowuk Tribal Council, followed by Deputy Grand Chief Annabette Anishpaniskum from the Anishinaabe Aski Nation, representing the leadership of Treaty 9. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Evelyn Korkmas, a St. Anne's residential school survivor, an international and national advocate on clergy sexual abuse. I would like to thank the media for continuing to focus on this very important issue for all residential school survivors and their families. I would like to thank Charlie Angus for his dedication and persistence to hold the government accountable. A big thank you to Nan, Deputy Grand Chief Annabette Atsipanishkam, and Mckiber, Deputy Grand Chief Rebecca Friday, for their support and commitment. Gishchaminguish to Dr. Edmund Matatawaban for his persistence for seeking justice for the horrific acts of genocide committed at St. Anne's Residential School. St. Anne's Residential School survivors are demanding that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau sit down to meet over the massive miscarriage of justice we, as survivors, have suffered at the hands of his government. An internal review of handling of the St. Anne's child abuse cases by Justice Pitfield reveals the vast majority of the 427 survivors were heard despite facts that the government suppressed police evidence verifying the crimes, and all that at least 81 cases will need to be re-examined. St. Anne survivors are demanding Prime Minister Trudeau to sit down and explain how we will address this massive miscarriage of justice. I personally want the Prime Minister to explain why the government not only withheld names and evidence of the perpetrators, but are refusing to turn over the person of interest reports that would allow survivors to have closure on our files. Since March 2016, I have been asking for court disclosure reports to be enforced against the government. The Canadian courts have refused to enforce court orders against government officials, even after the Supreme Court of Canada said that the courts have a duty to enforce for each claimant. What good are court orders for Indigenous people when there are no consequences for contempt of court orders by the government and church officials? We as survivors need to make decisions for our own claims. What kind of system do we have in Canada when the government deliberately suppresses thousands of pages of police evidence in cases of horrific child abuse? The Prime Minister needs to tell us why he is siding with the church officials and predators of these crimes. He needs to do the right thing and end the cover-up. It is time to sit down with the St. Anne survivors so we can have justice and closure for the crimes committed by the Catholic Church and Canada when we were children. The Pitfield Report is a mere glimpse into the denial of justice by the federal government. What happened to St. Anne's survivors represents a massive miscarriage of justice, and yet we see no effort by the Prime Minister to reach out to us survivors or to ensure that our legal rights are protected. In closing, I would like to say, if Canada's justice system does not work for the Indigenous people, is it because the system can't or won't shed its colonial legacy? Thank you.
Waje pugunito nestinina anusha kapecha miajo te miagechugo gaya tabachmur katibachmur chigilok osito pugunuia pastan dishigishon mingwesh magapugumiseni tawnikan kapetwichi goyahok Charlie Angus Moj ganiganish kakegono gemaone. Good day. My name is Rebecca Friday. I'm the Deputy Grand Chief of Mckiber. What I just said in my own language was very important to me. And I just thanked all the people that are here at the front supporting Evelyn, including Charlie and I and Anna Betty. So it's very important that I say my statement in my own language. Many of the Mckiber people, including my own family, were forcibly taken from their home as children and institutionalized in residential schools. One of the most of these was the St. Anne Institute in Fort Albany. I do not like to call it school because it was not that. It was a horrible institution meant by our government not to educate, but to strip the children of their language, culture, and tradition. The federal government has denied justice and truth about St. Andrews for over 100 years. But while it was operating and during secret police investigation and during the settlements of the claims of the residential school survivors, documents were held by the government from police investigation were hidden many years by the government's lawyers. These documents would have proven truth, the claims of those survivors. And, still today, the government refused to reopen the process and has fought school survivors every step of the way. Is this the reconciliation the Prime Minister claims to believe in? We will not go away and be silent. We will continue to speak the truth. The Prime Minister steps forward to publicly recognize this truth and agree in bringing the real restitution for survivors and their communities. Then we can begin to talk about reconciliation. I wrote an affidavit back in 2016 that would explain the situation. There was an epidemic of suicides in our region, and it's still happening today. So it is time for the remaining survivors of St. Andrews to have a face-to-face meeting with Prime Minister to acknowledge this horrific harm that has been done. Minister Bennett came to Arawabaskat. She did nothing since 2016 when she came. Because of the horrors of the residential schools and the complete cover-up by the government, many of my people were struggling to find a path forward to a better future. Many struggled with opiate addiction and homelessness. Suicide has taken toll in our communities. We need culturally appropriated programs to address these issues. The government needs to step and put in place adequate funds to address these issues immediately. Many years ago, the government of Canada had a policy to get rid of the Indian problem. They spend enormous amount of money to build and operate these residential schools to achieve this. It is time the government spend the same amount of effort addressing the damage it has done. The Prime Minister and his new cabinet needs to stop fighting us and instead give us support as we try to recover from the harm inflicted on us. It is time for the truth. It is time for action. It is time for change, and then we can have reconciliation. Thank you very much.
Wache, good morning. My name is Anna Betty Achnibaneshkam, and I represent Anishinaabe Nation. There are 49 First Nations within our Indigenous government. On behalf of the people of Anishinaabe Nation, we remain in support and stand with all survivors of our territory. I'd like to thank the media for being here. MP Charlie Angus, Evelyn Korkmaz, who has continued tirelessly to seek justice, and Gitchimingwech, to Deputy Grand Chief Rebecca Friday. The survivors of St. Anne's Residential School suffered inconceivable horrors as children, and it is unconscionable that the federal government continues to re-traumatize them by dragging them through the courts and their relentless effort to deny their justice. You know, we are very proud, and we will continue to stand with Evelyn and all of St. Anne survivors and all of the survivors throughout this country. And we are very honored of their courage and perseverance throughout this endless process. Many survivors have their lives have ended, or their health is failing, and you know, this battle must stop. You know, they should have this opportunity to relay their experience and to receive the justice. We are profoundly disappointed that the Prime Minister, that his actions have not matched the words that he has shared with many of us, especially when he talks about reconciliation. And speaking about the truth. The prolonging this senseless legal battle makes a mockery of the government, of the government's commitment and reconciliation. This cannot be reconciling. There is no reconciliation without justice. Tomorrow, when the federal government swears in, we ask that you remember the words of the survivors. We ask that you remember all the families who have found their loved ones within the mass graves of this country, and that you must stand behind the words of reconciliation.
All right, so in order to ensure that, hey, we have a healthy globe, we have to have a healthy environment, and that means climate action. And in British Columbia, they have what's called CleanBC, and it is supposed to address a lot of climate action. It's an initiative that includes electric cars. It includes a lot of things that are supposed to actually target and lower carbon emissions into the air. Thus, we know that carbon emissions in the air means greenhouse gases, which is actually warming up our planet and causing all kinds of crazy weather patterns. While we were recording this here in Surrey, BC, that we were in the middle of a cyclone-type storm that had centralized over the Pacific Northwest. So, and it was a lot of high winds and rain, and which induces flooding and things like that. There have been several different types of weather patterns around the world. When we go into Africa, we also find in the Great Lakes region that they've been experiencing a lot of large rainfall, leading to flooding and washing away crops and things like that people actually need to live. So the question is CleanBC really clean when we consider that how hydroelectric, in order to build a dam, how they have to tear apart an ecosystem in order to put the dam in there so they can start using the water to harvest electricity? And is the idea of using natural gas as clean as it really could be? So you're going to hear a couple of other ideas, some good, some maybe not so good ideas when you listen to this next segment. Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
Good afternoon. My name's Merran Smith, and I'm a fellow at Simon Fraser University, the founder of Clean Energy Canada, and the co-chair of BC's Climate Solutions Council. And I'd like to acknowledge that Premier Horgan and I are on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Songhees, and the Esquimalt First Nation. It's my pleasure to be here today in person with Premier Horgan. With the cyclone bomb going on out there. We are here in Victoria, and we're going to be joined virtually by Minister Heyman, plus my colleagues from the Climate Solutions Council, Colleen Giroux-Schmidt and Mark Jaccard, plus the president of Seaspan Marine Transportation, Mckiber. Ian was going to be hosting us today, but the weather's switched things up for us. And the weather has been a conversation in BC over the past year. We felt the devastating impacts of climate change firsthand this summer. We watched the community of Lytton burn to the ground due to climate change. The heat dome killed crops and wildlife and British Columbians, some of our friends and our neighbors. I grew up in this province, running around as a kid in the summer, breathing clean air. But this summer, we all breathe smoke, and for days, some of us, and for weeks, others. And this is really the new normal for our kids in the summers in British Columbia. It's being called a climate emergency around the world, and here in BC, we're feeling the impacts here. So in order to solve this emergency, every nation, every province or state, city or council, and community and businesses, we all need to do our part. So when Minister Heyman asked me to join the BC Climate Solutions Council, I knew we had an opportunity to do the right thing here in BC, to cut our carbon pollution, to transition to clean energy and away from fossil fuels, and to transition to a 21st century economy that was more equitable and inclusive, including with Indigenous nations. So I'm very, very pleased to be here today with the Premier and the Minister to announce BC's next phase of climate action. It's my pleasure to introduce Premier Horgan.
There we go. Good.
Where's my mask?
Pocket. Thank you, Merran, and good afternoon, everyone. It is great to be here on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people. I want to thank Merran and Colleen for their work with the Climate Solutions Council. I want to thank Dr. Jaccard for his, quite frankly, lifetime of work on this very important subject. And to Ian McIver, thank you as well for helping us today launch the CleanBC Roadmap to 2030. A strong and ambitious climate plan to deliver on BC's commitment to reduce climate pollution, build a better, cleaner economy for everyone, and doing so with the enormous progress that we've made over the past couple of years. With the support of CleanBC, companies like Seaspan and Corvus Energy have joined forces to make shipping cleaner and more affordable, not just here in British Columbia, but indeed internationally. And Seaspan is converting a cargo ferry from fossil fuels to biofuels. We would have been talking about that in more detail. I'm sure Ian will say something about that later on in the agenda. But he'll talk about Corvus and homegrown batteries and all of the technological innovation that's coming out of British Columbia as we collectively do our part to address the globe's biggest challenge. Merran touched upon this past summer, but I've had the honor of being Premier for 4 summers now, and 3 of those 4 summers were the worst fire seasons in BC history. Add on to that the devastation of the heat dome this past summer, and I think all British Columbians, indeed all Canadians, are focused on making progress on climate change, not sometime in the future, but right now. The threat is no longer decades away. It is here with us in everything that we do. Impacts of flooding, which will likely follow the cyclone bomb of this weekend, are also ever present for people living in British Columbia. Our rivers used to be the highway for our salmon. Now they are potential devastation for our communities, and that has to stop. We need to make sure that we're regulating the carbon emissions of our largest polluters. We need to make sure we're assisting people in making a transition from how they do business today to how we need to do business in the future. And I believe that the progress that we've made under the leadership of Minister Heyman is outstanding relative to our friends across the country and indeed across the continent. But we can't rest on our laurels. Indeed, now is the time when British Columbians and Canadians are focused on the imperative of action to work with the incoming federal government to deliver on the promise of CleanBC here. And I believe our roadmap will do that by powering businesses and communities to make changes in how they act. In changes, that means using our abundance of clean electricity, electrifying those fossil fuel industries that are still out there, and making sure as we put a cap on those emissions, reduce methane pollution, we can do so in a way that makes a transition over time so that we meet our 2030 goals and we get to net zero by 2050. The Seaspan Corvus example is there, and I'm sure Ian will talk about that. But our province is uniquely positioned to thrive in a low-carbon economy. For decades now in British Columbia, successive governments have focused on this initiative, and we have dialed it up since 2017 because the chance and the opportunity to build an economy that's focused on clean energy, focused on reducing emissions, is exactly what British Columbians have asked us to do, and we have every intention of delivering on that promise to everyone in British Columbia. We have to have the same common purpose to attacking climate change that we have had to attacking COVID-19. This transcends political boundaries. It transcends regions of British Columbia, all of us working together with a singular focus on lifting up everyone. As we put a price on carbon pollution, we have to make sure that the low-income and moderate-income British Columbians do not suffer from that. As we bring forward initiatives to make housing less carbon focused and more carbon friendly, we need to make sure that there are government programs in place that will stimulate the economic activity that will build the economy of the future. There are challenges ahead for all of us, there is no doubt. But with challenge also comes opportunity. Seaspan and Corvus can speak to that. But it's not just those two companies, it's companies right across British Columbia that have been focusing for the past decade on how they can take this challenge and make it an opportunity, create wealth and opportunity for themselves and other British Columbians. That's our focus with the roadmap to 2030. I'll now pass it on to Minister Heyman. He can provide more details on how we're going to get there.
Thank you very much, Premier. I want to acknowledge that I and other speakers are joining you today from the traditional territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. Today's a really important day for climate action and the clean economy in British Columbia. I want to thank you, Premier Horgan, for your leadership. I also want to thank Merran Smith, Colleen Giroux-Schmidt, and Mark Jaccard, all of whom have played an important role in the development of this CleanBC Roadmap and have shown leadership in British Columbia to tackle this issue for a long time. I also want to recognize the leadership of Ian McIver and the entire team at Seaspan. It's too bad that due to today's weather, we could not be on site at Seaspan today. Today's announcement is the result of significant collaboration between businesses and government, Indigenous nations, all levels of government, in fact, and the public coming together. It shows what we can accomplish when we're working together. Our government has taken the advice, the independent advice of the Climate Solutions Council, made up of members who represent diverse backgrounds across British Columbia, policy experts, labor leaders, youth, business, local government, Indigenous leaders, and environmental organizations. The science is crystal clear about our climate emergency. Weather events like this weekend and today are becoming more impactful, and the time to act is now. This CleanBC Roadmap is our plan to fully meet our 2030 emissions target and build new opportunities for people across BC. The roadmap includes accelerated and expanded actions across different pathways with a focus on affordability and supporting business transitions. The roadmap considers the state of clean technology and solutions for each sector and works to bring down costs and increase availability. It builds on and strengthens the actions that we have already taken since 2018 with CleanBC and that are on track to significantly reduce emissions. It also includes new ones. We've had early successes, but we know that much more needs to be done, and that's why we've developed this roadmap to reach 100% of our 2030 target and set the foundation for future years and future targets. Across British Columbia, people have responded positively since we first announced our plan. For example, British Columbia has the largest uptake of electric vehicles per capita on this continent. We were the first jurisdiction in the world with a 100% zero-emission law in place. And we're going to accelerate that with this roadmap. BC will mandate that 90% of all new car truck sales be clean and zero-emission by 2030 and 100% by 2035. We can do this because we've seen that the auto industry and other governments saw what we were doing and decided that we need to move faster, spurred on by actions that we and other subnationals have taken. Also, as part of this roadmap, we're developing new medium and heavy-duty vehicle zero-emission requirements because the science is clear. We need to rapidly move to clean energy in absolutely everything we do. We know that the global economy is quickly moving toward a net zero emissions future. There are investment opportunities for companies that have a commitment to net zero emissions. That, in fact, is on the agenda for the upcoming UN Climate Conference in Glasgow. And in turn, companies that don't have a plan are facing stiff questioning from investors who are turning away. In BC, some of our largest industrial operators, accounting for 50% of our industrial emissions, have already taken the first step and committed to reaching net zero emissions by 2050. Our roadmap will help BC industry thrive in this new environment, so our exports are not replaced by higher carbon products from elsewhere. We've already launched 22 emission reduction projects together with industry through our CleanBC Industry Fund, and these projects are expected to reduce nearly 1 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent between now and 2030. We also recently announced a range of measures with BC Hydro to encourage switching to clean electricity. Our plan means that BC will attract only industrial projects that are already designed to be low carbon in line with our targets and ready for a net zero emissions future. This will reduce the emissions impact of any new industrial development. We made our oil and gas sectoral targets clear a year ago, and this roadmap includes our commitment to meet that reduction target. We will work with experts, industry, and Indigenous nations on programs and policies that will achieve this, including regulation where necessary. This roadmap also includes a wide range of additional policies that will ensure industry emissions are in line with our sectoral and provincial emission reduction targets, while also maintaining healthy business environment and competitiveness. The roadmap has many, many more actions to transition to a cleaner future and to maintain affordability in buildings, in communities, in transportation across British Columbia. We know that the changing climate is creating uncertainty for British Columbians and everyone around the globe. Risks and creativity are part of this equation. But actions can fuel optimism and success. Thriving in this environment takes leadership. Leadership by government, leadership by communities, leadership by industry, and it takes improving as we learn more. Today, we want to acknowledge the leadership that Seaspan has taken to move its ferry fleet to a net zero future. The combination of electrification, low-carbon fuels, and a re-examination of the way it operates puts Seaspan among the first in their sector to design their net zero future. This reflects a BC brand of leadership, and I want to offer thanks to Seaspan CEO Ian McIver for seeing this opportunity and for making it happen. What is taking place at Seaspan is now happening right across the province. People are seeing the opportunities for change and moving to a cleaner, brighter future. The CleanBC Roadmap that our government has put together, along with our accountability measures in the Climate Change Accountability Act, are very important tools in building that future. Thank you very much, and I'd now like to introduce Ian McIver, President of Seaspan Marine Transportation, to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Mr. Heyman, and the Premier, too, for this opportunity to tell the Seaspan story and our journey to a greener future. Seaspan Marine Transportation is continually evaluating our options for alternative and low-carbon fuels, and we're very excited to have several successful projects under our belt and others in development. Seaspan Marine has invested with High Sea, our Haisla joint venture to service LNG Canada, in LNG-fueled escort tugs, as well as full electric ship docking tugs. Likewise, Seaspan Ferries has LNG hybrid ro-ro vessels. These are ferries operating between the Lower Mainland and Vancouver Island since 2016, and will soon add 2 more LNG hybrid vessels to that fleet by first quarter of 2022. Seaspan has been working closely with CleanBC and with the BC Low Carbon Fuel Standards in order to utilize existing legislation to lead the way in emissions reductions in the marine industry. We're happy that BC has such a strong greenhouse gas reduction regulation, and we look forward to continuing the development of this policy and the resulting programs. As part of our emissions reduction strategy, we've found ways to bring several low emissions fuels and technologies into our fleet. Biofuels. Seaspan Ferries has successfully tested and operated vessels on 100% biofuel, which offers significant reduction in GHGs. We'll run vessels on biofuel as part of our long-term emissions reduction strategy, and we'll increase its usage across our fleets where it is the best solution to reduce emissions. With LNG, Seaspan Ferries and Seaspan Marine both have vessels either in operation or in construction that consume LNG as fuel. LNG already offers a sizable reduction in greenhouse gases, but with the introduction of carbon-neutral sources of natural gas, such as renewable natural gas, RNG, from FortisBC, this reduction can be multiplied. We successfully completed a carbon-neutral RNG pilot with our supply partners FortisBC after the recent reopening of their RNG program, and will look to increase RNG consumption as the program and volumes available move forward. Propulsion battery technology. Seaspan Marine, through investment in battery hybrid vessels for Seaspan Ferries, or full battery powered ship docking tugs with the High Sea Marine company, continues to leverage battery technology for propulsion systems. The use of batteries allows us to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and to work with BC Hydro to fuel our ships with clean electricity. Seaspan Ferries has been operating these hybrid vessels since 2016, and we continue to invest in those vessels by installing larger battery banks, and that is with our partners at Corvus Energy. So we're replacing some of the battery banks with larger ones. Zero emissions vehicles. We have vehicles running around in our terminals, and we are moving towards testing and hopefully a future investment in a whole fleet of battery electric terminal trucks. They'll be fueled, of course, with clean electricity from BC Hydro. We have a very strong feeling that that's going to be a successful project moving forward. Lastly, from the fuel side of things, we're looking at LNG as a bunker fuel. This is a prime gateway here in Vancouver to Asia for Canadian commodities and trade. Seaspan will continue to leverage the clean LNG resources here in Canada and is currently developing an LNG bunkering business with Fortis to enable foreign-going vessels calling on Vancouver to have access to clean LNG and RLNG, renewable LNG, to power their ships. The last thing, we are an operating company, and one of the things that I think we all need to think about is how we operate and efficiently deploy our assets and use technology in the deployment of our assets to minimize emissions across all platforms, regardless of the fuel type. And I think that's a big initiative that everybody should be working on. So in closing, 2030, it's only 8 years from now, and we need all the tools the government has at its disposal to support our efforts to ensure we collectively meet those 2030 and 2050 climate action goals. So that's my remarks for now, and I'd like to introduce Colleen Giroux-Schmidt. She's the co-chair of the Climate Solution Council and VP at Energia. So I'll introduce her right now.
Thank you. I'd like to start by expressing my gratitude for being here today on the traditional lands of the Squamish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh. I'd also like to express gratitude to the Premier, to Minister Heyman, for their government's leadership in announcing the roadmap today. I'd also like to share my gratitude with my colleagues from the Climate Solutions Council. It's an incredible group of people that challenged and were able to work and push, I think, to help the roadmap be what it is today. And I'd also like to express gratitude to my colleagues at Interjex who shared me for this last 2 years. The council experience for me has been interwoven with becoming a parent. The minister asked me to join the council when I was expecting my first son, and he's been in the background for many of our meetings this year. I highlight this today to underscore the sense of urgency for why we need to act. These dates are not abstract. 2030, my son will be 11 years old. In 2035, when we have 100% zero-emission vehicle reg here in BC, he'll be 16 and learning to drive, maybe. And in 2050, he's going to be younger than I am right now. So the roadmap is great, but it also is going to require a lot of work from all of us. And so we need to get started this afternoon. As been mentioned, the scope of this challenge and opportunity is vast. It's going to need cooperation and action from all levels of government. It's going to need the commitment and funding from the private sector, and it's going to need all of us as individuals also contributing. The opportunity we have in front of us is to transform our society, our economy, and our lives here in British Columbia and around the world. This isn't about tinkering with what we have to date. This is about looking at what we need to be in 2050 and beyond, and working to build that society and economy today. BC has an opportunity to thrive in this, and at Interjex we believe in building a better world through renewable energy, and we're here to contribute and see this opportunity through. I want to finish by sharing the story of the Hummingbird. Can't see it on camera, but I've got Hummingbird on my dress and on my mask. Hummingbird was in a forest that was burning, and all of the other animals were standing and watching their home burn. Hummingbird went to the river and took a drop of water in her beak and went and dropped it on the flames. And she did this again and again. The other animals asked Hummingbird, "What are you doing?" And she responded, "What I can." We all need to be Hummingbird now going forward so that in 2050, My son is not having this conversation again, and he's living in that better world. Thank you, and I'd now like to introduce my colleague from the Climate Solutions Council, Mark Jaccard.
Thank you. Thanks, Colleen. That's tough to follow. That was fantastic. I've been involved in climate policy for 30 years, and I know from this experience that achieving effective climate policy is an extremely difficult task. Effective climate policy nudges people to use slightly different technologies and do things slightly differently, like charging the battery in their electric car or installing an electric heat pump in their home. The reality is that some vocal people won't want to do this, even though the change is small and the extra cost small or even zero. Politicians know that the media will focus on and amplify these complaints. This is difficult because politicians instinctively want to please everyone. Isn't that right, George? Thus, for success with the climate challenge, we need politicians to show leadership. We need politicians who are willing to do the right thing and face the consequences. In 2018, the NDP government of John Horgan showed North American leadership with its CleanBC climate plan. It showed that it was willing to implement the difficult but essential policies, a rising carbon price, and tightening regulations that together reduce the burning of coal, gasoline, diesel, and natural gas. Without these policies, climate targets promised by politicians are not sincere. Today, with its 2021 roadmap, this government is demonstrating yet again, and with greater effect, climate leadership. And myself, as a lead author on climate policy with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, I can say that this leadership shown today is of global significance. Now, however, comes the hard part. The government must quickly implement the key policies of this roadmap. The carbon price must keep rising, and the regulations must meet or exceed the stated levels, including a zero-emission electricity requirement, the zero-emission vehicle mandate, the cap on natural gas emissions, and declining cap on oil and gas production emissions, bioenergy requirements, and a more ambitious low-carbon fuel standard, as well as support to Indigenous peoples, low-income households, and others who may need help with this climate-saving transition. I am honored and proud to have contributed to this policy design as a member of the Climate Solutions Council. But I especially believe that it is this government that should be extremely proud today of its global climate leadership. I now hand it back to Merran Smith, I believe, who's the MC. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian and Colleen and Mark for participating in this event today. Special thanks to Mark and Colleen and all of the Climate Solutions Council for the many hours that they put in advising the government. I really want to thank the Premier here today and the Minister in Vancouver for their bold and courageous steps forward with this roadmap to 2021. I'd say, as Mark has mentioned, this is really a significant world-leading and continent-leading plan. And I'm proud of BC for moving forward with this, so thank you. But this is a roadmap for a journey that we have to take together. And what matters today is not what gets said. What matters is not what gets said today, but what gets done. And that's what will be judged by our peers, our kids, and their kids. So with 2030 approaching, as has been said, there's simply no time to waste, and the next 6 months are going to be crucial. What's exciting is that the world is transitioning to a clean energy economy, and that our global trading partners have shown that a good climate plan is also a good economic strategy. And so with the release of today's roadmap, BC has a once-in-a-generation opportunity to link its economic and its climate goals, and that's exciting. But if we're going to follow this roadmap and get to our destination by 2030, it's going to take the best of all of us, of industry, the clean tech sector, Indigenous peoples, cities, and academia, NGOs. It's going to take the best of all of us working together. It's easy to criticize, it's easy to point fingers at somebody else, but we need to pull together and pull our best selves forward if we're going to succeed and beat the climate emergency that we're in. And we need to do this for our kids.
Okay, so a clean planet means a healthier planet, meaning that our planet itself is able to breathe. Yes, our planet itself does actually breathe. It has cycles of exchanged gases and things like that. So let's move on to the last segment today, and this is WHO, and they're talking about a plan to alert us to epidemics, pandemics, and maybe to help curb the next pandemic or make it not last quite as long, because we've been in this particular pandemic for approximately about 600 days. And there needs to be more checks and balances is what they're discussing, and how the WHO can help lead that and help other health authorities and health systems around the world just keep us breathing healthier, keep us disease-free, and distribute the right equipment, medications, things like that to make us a healthier human race. So let's listen to that, and thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
An epidemic intelligence that has been created here in Berlin, the WHO hub. It is three foci. It is better data, better analytics, and better decisions. And you will hear more about this and the intentions during the session. But because we need to connect to the world, and we need to make sure that the many initiatives that are now being created, as we analyze what is it that we lack in terms of pandemic preparedness and response, we are delighted that other colleagues are joining us who are also building important initiatives. Our session will have different phases. We will hear at first from important political actors who are helping shape the ecosystem. We will then hear more about the WHO hub,
and then we will hear more about the other initiatives and are able to discuss some general questions that are important. What we have said in terms of principles or dimensions or characteristics of such an ecosystem, we understand now that it clearly needs to be multidisciplinary, that it needs to be multi-stakeholder, that we need to build a trust architecture around data, and that we need a distributed information exchange. Not everything is to be centralized in one place. So it's my great honor to lead you through this discussion, and my particular pleasure to first ask the Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros, to speak and to give you an understanding what is the role of WHO in the center of such a ecosystem, and to explain why the world needs such an ecosystem at this point and how we can build it through which kind of political support. Please, Dr. Tedros, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ilona. Excellencies, distinguished guests, dear colleagues and friends. Indeed, the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us the world many painful lessons. In my remarks last night, I outlined 4 areas in which I believe the global health architecture must be strengthened to prepare for, prevent, detect, and respond rapidly to outbreaks with epidemic and pandemic potential. One of those is the need for new powerful systems and tools for global surveillance to collect, analyze, and disseminate data on outbreaks with the potential to become epidemics and pandemics. Viruses move fast, but data can move even faster. With the right information, countries and communities can stay ahead of emerging risks and save lives. Urbanization, deforestation, climate change, and intensified agricultural practices are all increasing the risks of epidemics and pandemics, including those of zoonotic origin and antimicrobial resistance pathogens. At the same time, new technologies are giving us the ability to predict, prevent, detect, and respond to outbreaks faster than ever before. Harnessing the power of these new technologies to save lives is not just an opportunity, it is an obligation. In October last year, Chancellor Angela Merkel and I first discussed the idea of a new platform to enhance global capacity for pandemic and epidemic intelligence. That's what the WHO Hub for Pandemic and Epidemic Intelligence is all about. Leveraging innovations in data science, harnessing the power of artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and other cutting-edge technologies, and fostering greater sharing of data and information between communities and countries. No single institution or nation can do this alone. That's why we have used the term collaborative intelligence to capture the essence of our collective mission. It's not a single centralized system, but a constantly evolving global network designed for a fast-changing and unpredictable future. The WHO Hub will bring together scientists, innovators, policymakers, One Health specialists, and civil society representatives from around the world to work across borders and disciplines, making collaborative intelligence a reality. The knowledge and insights developed through the WHO Hub are designed to be put to practical use on the ground all over the world to improve detection, risk assessment, forecasting, and speed up the use of expanded genomic sequencing and diagnostic efforts. The tools and capacities developed at the WHO Hub will be achieved through collaborations among public health practitioners working at the local level and connected at the regional and global levels. It's a mosaic approach, an epidemiological ecosystem. The old, rigid, siloed, hierarchical approaches are no longer sufficient or practical. It's time for public health to catch up with other fields of sciences like CERN's global network of supercomputers or the hyper-local networks of hundreds of thousands of weather stations that contribute to a global commons. What we have started in Berlin is the first building block of a strategic effort to building country and workforce capabilities, expand training, and support national public health institutions and emergency operation centers. In line with the recommendations of recent reviews of pandemic preparedness and response, this is part of WHO's commitment to keeping the world safer, to being the organization the world needs, and to giving countries the information and tools they need to protect their people. No one has done more to make the vision of the WHO Hub a reality than Chancellor Merkel. Under her leadership, Germany has become a leading advocate for global health. This far predated the current crisis, going back to the 2007 G8 summit, which mobilized $60 billion for global health. When the COVID-19 pandemic struck, the German government moved quickly to expand its financial support for WHO, becoming our biggest donor, as I said yesterday, and was one of the first supporters of the Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator, so that we could get therapeutics, diagnostics, and vaccines to the countries that need them most. It's that kind of international solidarity and forward thinking that the WHO Hub represents, working with partners around the globe to bring new technology and methodologies to all countries in an equitable, collaborative fashion. You will be hearing about all of this in much more detail from my brother, Dr. Chikwe Ikweazu, our new Assistant Director General for Emergency Health Intelligence, formerly head of Nigeria's Center for Disease Control. I'm glad also that the Honorable Minister of Nigeria is with us today. Thank you, sir, for joining us. I cannot tell you how pleased and honored I am that Chikwe will be joining us and leading this visionary effort. Of course, the hub is a game changer, and he knows he has big responsibility. And since we spoke about him taking over this hub, I could see how seriously he has taken it. And I would also use this opportunity to thank Bernard Schwatlander, my former chief of cabinet and my dear brother, for really building the first, blocks that are necessary for this hub. We hope to hear from many of you and your colleagues. Please spread the word. We're looking for committed and diverse researchers from around the world to come and join us on this journey. The hub is founded on the belief that global problems require a collaborative response that connects local and global efforts. By working together, we can build a healthier, safer, and more sustainable world for all. And I would also like to share with you that this hub will benefit if the pandemic agreement or pandemic treaty becomes a reality. As you know, the pandemic treaty was first proposed by the president of the European Council, Mr. Charlie Michel, and I think he will join us today. I'm glad that he's joining in this panel because realizing the pandemic treaty will be a good, support for the hub, because many of the things we're saying will get some obligations from countries to contribute to the hub. So once again, thank you so much, Ilona, for this opportunity, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tedros, for sharing that vision with us and underlining the enormous importance of the kind of work we are undertaking now and embarking on. We already heard on the one hand yesterday in the opening many of the initiatives that are underway in the European Union and in particular also at the European Commission. You, Dr. Tedros, have already introduced Mr. Charles Michel, who is here with us live from Brussels. You've already indicated one of the key initiatives that the European Union has undertaken to propose a global pandemic treaty and to help move that forward. So, Mr. Michel, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this session, and we look forward to hearing the dimensions that the European Union wants to bring to this effort on collaborative intelligence and making the world safer. Please.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone from Brussels. But first of all, let me thank you, my dear brother Tedros, for organizing this panel. And congratulations to the WHO and Germany for making this intelligence hub a reality. And for me, it's an honor. It's also a pleasure to share this milestone, this important milestone, with all of you today. Dear friends, just last week, we had our latest European Council meeting here in Brussels. And I have now chaired over 16 meetings where the 27 EU leaders have addressed COVID-19. And I can tell you one thing. In a time of a crisis, what we crucially need is credible data and up-to-date intelligence. And today, I would like to address several topics with you. First, global governance for global solutions. Second, the lessons learned from our European response. And finally, the One Health approach needed more than ever. Ladies and gentlemen, COVID-19 has killed nearly 5 million people around the world, 5 million people. And it has also revealed that no country, not even the most developed, was prepared for such a pandemic, despite the many predictions of scientists. And the virus exposed the gaps in our national preparedness, but it has also exposed stark deficiencies in global governance. Information sharing is a clear example of that. The virus has been brutal and unrelenting. It has surprised us at every turn, but it has also revealed that with the right tools for sharing critical information rapidly, we can save lives. And this means sharing data about how virus spreads, who are the most vulnerable, and what the best treatments are. And it's obvious intensive international cooperation must play a critical role. When we cooperate with one another, when we trust one another, we can build common mechanisms and solutions at global, regional, and local level. And there is no doubt we must learn, we must implement new ways of working. And it's precisely for this reason that together with you, Dr. Tedros, we have proposed an international treaty on pandemics rooted in the WHO Constitution. And this idea is supported by heads of state and governments from many countries across the globe, but I know some are still reluctant, and we will try to convince them. Because this treaty would establish clear rules and a clear framework for everyone. It would guarantee equity and inclusiveness. It would also ensure access to information, financing, vaccines, and countermeasures. It would increase capacity and resilience at all levels. A legally binding instrument would also be the most effective basis for an international system of prevention, surveillance, collection, and exchange of scientific data. Because data is critical to our decision making, and it's crucial in developing safe and effective measures such as vaccines, medicines, or medical and protective equipment. And I'm convinced this intelligence hub will be an important step in bolstering our international cooperation. A clear demonstration of the benefits in setting up collaborative tools that work across sectors, especially tools that involve both private and public stakeholders and operate on any continent. We need to create an environment where every scientist, health worker, government can band together for a common cause. Working together to build new solutions to protect what's most precious, our health and our lives. And that's exactly what we want to achieve with this idea of an international treaty. We will continue to advocate and encourage the global community to support it, including in a few days and the next G20 meeting in Rome. Ladies and gentlemen, now I want to share with you three things the EU learned in our response to COVID-19. First point, coordination is vital. In the EU, health is merely a national or even sometimes a regional competence. Yet early in the pandemic, we realized that information sharing needed to be strengthened, not only between countries, but also between services within national administrations. So one of our first actions to bolster coordination was to task our ministers to consult with each other on a daily basis. And as a result, they held video conferences every working day during the first month, and then 3 times a week in the months that followed. And this was in addition to the heads of state and government meetings we held every 2 to 3 weeks. And we discovered that information at national level on infection rate, testing, or hospital capacity was not enough to manage the crisis. And so we decided to task the European Centre for Disease Control to start collecting and breaking down the data, and also to make sure that our common data was based on the same common criteria. And this helped us to better anticipate the next phases of this pandemic. It also helped us to provide targeted assistance to areas that needed it most. It was also extremely useful in assessing whether to restrict or to open mobility for our citizens. It sounds simple, but this was no easy task when you consider the different national structures, agencies, practices, and ways of collecting information, not to mention all the different languages we have at the EU level. And this is one of the challenges that the Information Hub will have to overcome on a much larger scale at global level. But it is worth the effort because credible data are invaluable. Second point, we learned the value of fact-based and objective decisions. And let me give you one example. Discussions on travel restrictions were extremely political and even controversial in the beginning of the crisis, especially since freedom of movement is a pillar of our European Union. And today, this has become a purely objective and scientific exercise, not only because we developed a common certificate, but because the European Centre for Disease Control publishes all the information, and citizens can have an overview of the COVID situation in their country and across the Union at the same time as national administrations. Third point, and probably the most important, we learned that solidarity is the gold standard in overcoming this pandemic. As the crisis progressed, we adapted and developed new solutions. In some cases, we were faster than others, in others, maybe slower. But we were always guided by the principle of EU solidarity and inclusiveness. We acted together, we had the same rules for everyone, and probably our joint procurement of vaccines is the most spectacular example of this EU solidarity. We shared the delivery of doses among our 27 member states, and today, more than 75% of adults in the EU are fully vaccinated. This is clearly a great achievement for the EU. Dear friends, we have learned many lessons from this pandemic. We continue to learn every day and to improve our response every day. We must continue to adapt to the pandemic as the situation evolves, and we will continue to do so until everyone is safe. But everyone is not yet safe, and this is not acceptable. The gap in vaccination rates between developed and developing countries must be solved quickly. And this means removing the obstacles that are hampering the global rollout of vaccines. First, we must export doses of vaccines. This is what we did from the very beginning and are still doing at EU level. Second point, financing COVAX is good, but it's not enough. And we must solve the current obstacles and bottlenecks. And third point, we must fulfill more quickly our commitments on vaccine donations. And finally, we have started with African governments, the European Investment Bank, and private partners to develop fast-track and concrete projects to increase vaccine manufacturing capacities. And I'm personally convinced that we must make this international solidarity much more operational and much more urgent. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to raise one final point. Until now, we have focused on the human side of health, and rightly so. But in the future, I hope we'll invest more in One Health, the link between our environment, animal health, and human health. We cannot wait for a new virus to emerge. We must adapt our practices and our behavior with wild animals and nature. This will ensure that viruses and bacteria do not transfer from nature to humans. It is the key to prevention. Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, COVID-19 has opened our eyes to our strengths and our weaknesses. And the European project is based on the principle of human dignity. We are convinced that global challenges like climate change, economic development, security, or the fight against pandemics require global solutions. We firmly believe, in a rules-based international order. We firmly believe in universal values, and we sincerely hope the international community will negotiate and agree on the future international treaty on pandemics. Let's keep in mind the future of our children in the spirit of our predecessors who signed the UN Charter over 75 years ago. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Michel, for taking the time to join us in person and to speak so passionately about this ecosystem and the role that a pandemic treaty as a set of rules within that ecosystem could play, but also to highlight the role of values as we build such an ecosystem. And you particularly highlighted collective action, which is a value also, not just something one does, solidarity and the inclusiveness. And that, of course, is absolutely central, as Dr. Tedros underlined, that no one is safe until everyone is safe, and everyone needs to be included in this process. And the inclusiveness also of the WHO Hub and the other initiatives that are going to be presented here today is a very, very important element of what we will be speaking about. So thank you very much again, and we look forward also to the cooperation within this ecosystem. And personally, I very much hope that the member states of the WHO at the end of November will take the decision to move forward with such a treaty. So we wish you good luck for the further negotiations, trying to convince some who are not yet of that opinion. Thank you very much, Mr. Michel. I now have the great pleasure to ask Dr. Thomas Steffen, the State Secretary of Health from the German Federal Ministry of Health, to speak to us, to underline some of the steps that Germany has taken. You have already heard yesterday and today that Germany is now the main funder of the World Health Organization, the strongest funder, the first funder of the World Health Organization. It has supported the building of the WHO hub here in Berlin. But there are many other dimensions to this work. And Dr. Steffen, over to you to share this with us.
Madam Chair, Mr. President, Mr. Director General, Mr. Minister, dear panel members, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the German Health Minister, Jens Spahn, and the federal government, it's a real pleasure to welcome you all in Berlin. It's a pleasure to speak to you this early morning on the global ecosystem. Let me start by saying I very much like the picture just used by Dr. Tedros, that the virus is not respecting borders. It's moving very, very fast around the globe. But he said data can be even faster. And this is a real chance to build the future ecosystem. We have to make use of the data and the better analysis to build a better world in future times. And that is why I want to really make use of this opportunity to discuss with you today also how Germany is contributing to the development of this global ecosystem for a pandemic and epidemic intelligence, and also what others can do and how they can contribute. Indeed, we are still in the greatest global crisis since the last decades, but it lies in our hands to make this the last global health crisis of this kind of extent. We must make use of the lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic, and we have to learn from past mistakes. Namely, being very clear of what needs to be done differently and to use the short political window of opportunity for structural changes. And I may tell you from past crises, there's always a very short window of opportunity, and it will be closed quite soon. So let's use this kind of window of opportunity. We all know through the various lessons learned and past panels what needs to be done. We are not lacking knowledge. We now need political courage to move beyond comfort levels and implement lessons learned. COVID-19 has highlighted how interconnected and interdependent our lives are across countries. And to use another picture, that only a few decades ago, the 193 countries around the world had been sailing in 193 boats. But today, it's very, very clear we are living in one boat, and this is our interconnected world. And that is why we have to fight such a crisis together. Collaboration with international partners to approach questions of global health is now needed more than ever. Pandemic preparedness for the next future emerging disease will need to build upon this interconnectivity. Therefore, improving global pandemic preparedness is a key priority also for Germany, and not only, of course, for Germany. And that is why I would like to highlight very briefly 4 central points on how we all can contribute to the development of a global ecosystem for pandemic and epidemic intelligence. First, we fully support and we will continue to support the WHO Hub for Pandemic and Epidemic Intelligence here in Berlin. And I had the pleasure, the honor to meet Dr. Mckiber 3 weeks ago to already discuss very first steps and how we can collaborate and closely work together, not only, but also with the German government and the future hub here in Berlin. The hub works to increase the availability of the key data, develop state-of-art analytic tools and predictive models for risk analysis. And the COVID-19 pandemic clearly showed that such innovative technologies are much needed to effectively prevent future pandemics. I'm proud that the Federal Ministry of Health here in Germany committed to fund the WHO hub with up to 30 million euros annually. With this support of the hub, we are substantially improving and reshaping the global landscape for pandemic preparedness for a safer future. Second, we truly support the WHO and will continue to support the WHO in a very concrete terms as its main funder. We do this because we are convinced the world will remain unsafe from future emerging health threats unless the WHO is truly enabled, or in other words, we can only guarantee global health security if we have a truly capable international organization that is able to lead and to coordinate not only global health overall, but also pandemic preparedness and response. And this can only be the WHO. Also, the work and the mandate